Little Johnny came home after school. "Daddy, I have a bad grade in the English language." "Why?" asked his father. "Well, the teacher asked us the following question: Mary entered the forest with John and came out of the forest with Mike." "What is Mary?" "How come Mary is?" "A whore, of course," said the father. "That's what I said, but the teacher answered that Mary was a subject." Little Johnny walked into the kitchen, saw his mother making a cake, and announced, "I'm going to go play in my room for a couple of hours. I sure would like a piece of cake after, though." Later, when his mother brought him a piece of cake, little Johnny exclaimed, "Wow! It worked!" Puzzled, his mother asked, "What do you mean?" Little Johnny replied, "Daddy said that in order to get a piece around here, you have to spend a couple of hours playing first." A sportsman and father of 3 sons was anxious to share his latest kill with his family for Sunday dinner. He didn't want his sons to refuse to taste the delicious venison, so he sat the boys down for dinner without telling them what the meat was they were about to eat. "Oh, come on, Dad," said the oldest son. "What is this meat?" "Just taste it," said the father. "You will love it." The boys eyed each other nervously and put a piece of the meat on their forks. "Give us a little hint," pleaded the second son. "Only if you take a bite," said the father. As each boy took a cautious bite of the venison, the father continued, "Let me think, your mother calls me this from time to time." The oldest boy shouted, "Spit it out, boys, it's an..." A man is visiting a foreign country but does not speak the language that they speak there. He decides to go to a church service, but the priest is speaking the native language, so the American man just does whatever the man in front of him does. When the man in front of him stands, so does the American man. When the man in front of him sits, so does the American man. At one point, the priest says something, and the man in front of him stands. So the American man stood too. Everyone in the church gasped, so the American man hurriedly sat back down. Later, the American man figured out that the priest was congratulating a baby. When he asked who was the father and both men stood up, it caused some confusion. A young boy and his dad went out fishing one fine morning. After a few quiet hours out in the boat, the boy became curious about the world around him. He looked up at his dad and asked, "How do fish breathe underwater?" His dad thought about it for a moment, then replied, "I really don't know, son." The boy sat quietly for another moment, then turned back to his dad and asked, "How does our boat float on the water?" Once again, his dad replied, "Don't know, son." Pondering his thoughts again, a short while later, the boy asks, "Why is the sky blue?" Again, his dad replied, "I don't know, son." The inquisitive boy, worried he was annoying his father, asks this time, "Dad, do you mind that I'm asking you all of these questions?" "Of course not, son," replied his dad. "How else are you ever going to learn anything?" A guy buys his first motorcycle. The dealer tells him to keep a jar of Vaseline handy to rub on the chrome before it rains to prevent rusting. A few months later, the young man's girlfriend invites him to dinner at her parents' house. Before they go in, she explains their family tradition: whoever speaks first after dinner must do the dishes. After dinner, everyone sits in silence, waiting for the first person to break. After 15 minutes, the young man decides to speed things up. He leans over and kisses his woman in front of her family. No one says a word. Emboldened, he throws her on the table with her. Silence. Desperate, he grabs her mother and has with her on the table. Suddenly, they hear thunder rumble in the distance. The guy thinks of his bike and, instinctively, pulls the jar of Vaseline out of his pocket. Okay, says the father, "I'll do the dishes." One recent Sunday, a young boy arrived at his Sunday school class late. His teacher knew that the boy was usually very prompt and asked him if anything was wrong. The boy replied no, saying that he was going to go fishing, but that his dad told him that he needed to go to church instead. The teacher was very impressed and asked the boy if his father had explained to him why it was more important to go to church than to go fishing. To which the boy replied, "Yes, ma'am, he did. My dad said that he didn't have enough bait for both of us." A little kid gets on a city bus, sits right behind the driver, and starts talking loudly, "If my dad was a bull and my mom a cow, I'd be a little bull." The driver gets annoyed as the kids continue to yammer on. "If my dad was a rooster and my mom a hen, I would be a little chick." The kid goes on and on with all the animals he knows, when finally, the bus driver yells, "What if your dad was a bum and your mom was a drunk?" The kid smiles and says, "I'd be a bus driver." 3 little boys were sitting around talking about their fathers. The first boy said, "My dad can blow smoke rings." The second boy said, "My dad can blow smoke rings out of his nose." The third boy said, "Well, my dad can blow smoke rings out of his." The first and second boys were amazed. The second boy said, "Have you seen him do it?" "No," said the third boy, "but I've seen the tobacco stains on his eye." A distinguished young woman on a flight from Ireland asked the priest beside her, "Father, may I ask a favor?" "Of course, child. What may I do for you?" "Well, I bought an expensive woman's electronic hairdryer for my mother's birthday that is unopened and well over the customs limits, and I'm afraid they'll confiscate it. Is there any way you could carry it through customs for me? Under your robes, perhaps? I would love to help you, dear, but I must warn you, I will not lie. With your honest face, Father, no one will question you." When they got to customs, she let the priest go ahead of her. The official asked, "Father, do you have anything to declare?" "From the top of my head down to my waist, I have nothing to declare." The official thought this answer strange, so he asked, "And what do you have to declare from your waist to the floor?" "I have a marvelous instrument designed to be used on a woman, but which is, to date, unused." Roaring with laughter, the official said, "Go ahead, Father." Next. I was sitting in the waiting room of the hospital after my wife had gone into labor, and the nurse walked out and said to the man sitting next to me, "Congratulations, sir, you're the new father of twins." The man replied, "How about that? I work for the Double Mint Chewing Gum Company." The man then followed the woman to his wife's room. About an hour later, the same nurse entered the waiting room and announced that Mr. Smith's wife had just had triplets. Mr. Smith stood up and said, "Well, how do you like that? I work for the 3M Company." The gentleman who was sitting next to me then got up and started to leave. When I asked him why he was leaving, he remarked, "I think I need a breath of fresh air." The man continued, "I work for 7-Up.